Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. I am Carla with Race to Walk, and I am here with Andy Nardoni and Zach Small. And this is going to be fun tonight because we are going to be discussing a book called Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. And Andy and I are in Zach's book club, and this is what we've been reading for the summer. And we've had a lot of really great discussions, and so we're really excited that we're going to be able to chat and share it with you all. So, Annie, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. I'm Annie, and I got my master's degree in cultural apologetics December 2019. I'm a homeschool mom and teacher since 1995, and I am in my last year of that right now. And I read a lot. So my background's not even like a green screen. It's actually all the books that I've read. So books are my favorite thing. And I'm so glad that we have this book discussion tonight on one of the best books I've ever read in my life.
It's really good. It's really good. So Zach, how about you?
Yeah, so my name's Zach. I also got my MA in apologetics at Houston Baptist University. I recently completed my PhD at Faulkner University. And yeah, like Annie said, this is a wonderful book. I first encountered it at Faulkner. And honestly, I was a little confused why there was a fictional book on our syllabus. I wondered what was going on. But it was one of those things that it just turned out to be wonderful. And I think it's such an encouraging, wonderful summer read. And so I'm so glad that we all enjoyed it together.
Yeah, another thing, Annie and Zach all work on an unexpected journal. Zach's actually the managing editor. I mentioned that a lot on my channel. So anyway, you probably, if you've watched my channel, you've probably seen them before. So because we just had our superhero live stream. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dandelion Wine. I'm just going to give you an overview of it, and I'm sure. Oops, sorry. What are we doing here? Sorry, my slides aren't quite right. So I'm sure most people, at least in our generations and maybe a little bit older, are familiar with Ray Bradbury and his book Fahrenheit 451. And that's probably how most people know him, but this is when you read this, it's a very different book. So it was actually published in 1957. It's set in Greentown, Illinois, in 1928, and it just gives a picture of small town life. There's two main protagonists, Douglas and Tom, and they're 12 and 10. And so this is if you're familiar with Ray Bradbury, he passed away in 2012. In addition to Fahrenheit 451, he wrote the Martian Chronicles and also Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is a little more familiar. And there's a fourth book that was published, I think, in 2008. That's just more of a collection of the three stories. But these three here, Dandelion Wine, Farewell Summer, and Something Wicked This Way Comes, are considered the Greentown trilogy. And I don't really know about anybody else, but when I was reading this, it totally was not what I expected it to be, just only being familiar with him from Fahrenheit 451. It's really more of a series of vignettes, and this is a quote from the book where he writes, "Dandelion Wine is nothing if it is not the boy hidden the man playing in the fields of the Lord on the green grass of other August, in the midst of starting to grow up, grow old, and sense darkness, waiting under the trees to see the blood." So it is a very interesting book. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is it's really, as it mentioned in the intro, it's really a lot about time and identity and really discovering who you are. And one of the main themes in the book is there's a section on the happiness machine. And let me go to that slide. This is a quote, just to kind of prep you so you can kind of get a sense of what's going on there. But this is kind of in the little introduction about how the whole idea of the happiness machine comes in. Is Leo, how right you are, said Grandfather Spaulding, passing on his nightly strolls with his grandsons Douglas and Tom. But Leo, only you can shut these doomed talkers up. Invent something that will make the future brighter, well-rounded, infinitely joyous. You've invented bicycles, fixed the penny arcade contraptions, been our town movie projectionists, haven't you? Sure, said Douglas, invent us a happy machine. The men laughed. Don't, said Leo Offman. How have we used machines so far to make people cry? Yes, every time man and the machine look like they will get on all right, boom, someone adds a cog. Airplanes drop bombs on us, cars run us off cliffs. So is the boy wrong to ask? No. So this is the introduction from it. So Annie and Zach, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about that whole section and what this pursuit of the happiness machine does to the people in the book?
Zach, do you want to go first?
Sure. So and I'll start off with one kind of interesting effect that it has, and then Annie, you can maybe build off of that. But it causes a lot of stress, ironically, right? Building this happiness machine that's supposed to cause all these problems, or to solve all these problems, it actually causes a lot more problems than it solves, arguably. I mean, I think that's fair to say. It causes more than it solves. And, I mean, with him and his family, and even, I mean, you could say that Leo himself, I mean, he becomes obsessive about it, right? So even between him and his own kind of, mental well-being, right? So it's him and himself, him and his family. So I think that's one of the more interesting themes, because in that quote you read, Harla, it talks about how, we build machines and all they do is create sadness, right? Like airplanes drop bombs and cars run off cliffs. But the happiness machine sounds so noble, right? It sounds like such a noble thing. So, I mean, that's one of the major themes that stood out of this whole like construction process, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. I think the happiness machine, building something to give us happiness, does it really? He's constructing a machine that is supposed to make us happy, but where does happiness come from? It doesn't come from something that you construct or something that you buy. So it brings up the real conversation of what does make us happy? Is it something that we can create, thinking that if I put my own machinations in it, it's going to make something that is going to give me happiness, and will it give the person next to me happiness? What is the response that we would have to it? And this machine did cause a lot of trouble. But on the other hand, when you are a little kid and you think to build a happiness machine, wow, I can step into this machine and it'll be happy. It'll make me happy. It'll give me what I want. It'll give me ice cream. It'll take me to places that I dream of going to. So you can look at it in two ways. You can look at it as a grown-up and go, well, they make planes and they drop bombs. Or you can look at it as a little kid. Ooh, I can take a trip to Mount Rushmore and see things that I've never seen before. Go to the Grand Canyon where I never would maybe have a chance to go. Wouldn't that be fun? But it's imagination, but then is it really going to give you what you had expected?
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things to me was that, and I didn't notice this until I was preparing for tonight, but Leo, the man who's building it, is Leo Offman, and he is the town jeweler. So he deals in precious things, right? He has to be able to recognize value. And he, in the beginning of when he starts this whole endeavor, he is happy. He is content. He has this happy family life. And his wife said at the beginning, says, we don't need a happiness machine. And he's like, we need to help others get it, right? And so he's trying to synthesize something. And I think that some of the other things that we're going to talk about, it has to do with a real focus on things. And I think that that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to give somebody something that they don't have, where you have to kind of recognize what you do have and have like a sense of contentment, I think, to really have any sort of happiness. I think that's really the message of the whole book, and maybe one of them. There's a lot that you could get out of it, but in the beginning, Douglas, it's like he's realizing that he's alive, and he's recognizing these moments, and it's when he also like is beginning to be aware of death too. And so you kind of have to have this appreciation for life and those moments before you can really be aware of what death is, I think.
I think you're right. And it's so intriguing because you mentioned contentment, right? And, well, not to ruin and add any spoilers in here, but Leo's wife finally hits in the happiness machine, right? That's under the climax of this whole episode. And there's all these wonderful things. There's London, there's the Sphinx, there's Paris, I think. There's a lot of things. And she starts crying, right? And what's the problem with this episode, right? Is that I never really realized I was missing out. I found a quote, I never even thought of being in Paris in my life, but now you got me thinking Paris. So suddenly I want to be in Paris, and I know I'm not. And it's what you just said, right? Contentment is what it's all about.
And the machine brings discontentment to her life, which they can. It's like having an espresso machine. Well, now I have the espresso machine, and I have really yummy espresso. But I want that one over there that does 5 more features. So then you get the next espresso machine that does 5 more things. And then are you really content? I don't know. Does a machine give us contentment?
I think the other thing, like going with the idea of an espresso machine, it's like you want the experience, like when you're going into a coffee shop, but it's not just the coffee isn't the experience. It's actually being there. And so when we try to take these things that are really out of like context and out of relationship with other things, I think that's what the happiness machine did for his wife. It was because we'll see in like other sections there is this entering in of kind of like this shared experience, and other people are sharing their experiences with people who weren't there, but in this happy machine there's no relationship, it's just basically you're not a part of it at all. It's just sitting there on its own, I think.
I love how you say that too, and you talk about the experience, because so she's in this box in the garage, and she now realizes she wants to go to Paris. So her longing for Paris has not been fulfilled by this box, right? Her longing for Paris has been fulfilled, has been like kind of brought out that she never knew she had, but now she has no way to fulfill it. So it's kind of an interesting combination of like what you both were saying about experiencing something for real, and how different that is.
The other thing, and this is just kind of a side note, we had quite a bit of discussion on this during the book club. Ray Bradbury was, how would you guys describe his like belief system, his worldview? It's not really New Agey so much. He came from a Christian background, but he said he was a cafeteria religionist? Something like that, yeah. So you'll see a lot of themes of like reincarnation in the book. So this is like his overt beliefs in the book. But then there's this really, really interesting and I didn't get the page number on here. That's the other thing about this book. There's no chapter titles, not even numbers. So we're like Zach's on a Kindle, and we're like trying to like figure out like where we're gonna stop and start each week. But anyway, I can't remember which section, because the thing about the Happy Machine kind of goes, it's like threaded through the book. But there's one part where Leo Hoffman says, it's him that says this, right? We got the real Happy Machine 2,000 years ago. You remember that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that section, something like that.
Yeah. I'm on a Kindle, so I can probably find that for us, but I think you're right.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that Hoffman is a Jewish name. And so 2,000 years ago, what would that be? That would be when Jesus was here. And so it's like this little idea of like this idea of Jesus as, you know, the Messiah, the Redeemer, one that restores us to communion with God and with other people, where we can have that true happiness and contentment. That's popping up in this book by a writer who doesn't believe that, and you see reincarnation themes all the way through. That's just another really interesting little
So do you
idea.
think that he was doing that on purpose, incorporating like a kind of a buffet of little vignettes of different religions? He's got the reincarnation, he's got a glimmer of the Christian theme. Do you think he did that on purpose for the foundation of laying the story?
I don't know. Because, you know, sometimes you'll see people, like writers, they write something and it's like in opposition to what they actually say they believe, you know. So I don't know if he was, there's quite a few things like this. You're kind of like, what is he really trying to say here? Is this intentional, or is this just something that he wrote that came out?
Or is he speaking to the character? Like, does that character believe that's where my happiness machine was 2,000 years ago?
Yeah, but Leo Hoffman is Jewish.
Right. But I mean, the character, he put that in there to that character. He kind of pinned the different themes to different characters. So I don't know. But if you're raised under a certain belief system, some of that's going to bubble through, I think, in your writing. Glimmers of it. Not a real strong, not a rope, but more like an embroidery floss. It's going to show up here and there. So, but it is interesting how many different things he has going on. But the transcendent theme of we'll see each other in the next life or in the next world comes up. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is one of the things that we talked about on in the book group. There's a lot of parallels in the book. So there's in the introduction, he writes that, you know, he had just practiced writing scenes, like taking one little moment and writing a scene around it. And so he used those things that he had practiced his writing on to create this story. And there's a lot of parallels between different characters within, like the one that we're going to talk about, Colonel Freely. Like there's two scenes that kind of parallel, you know, some of the same things there. And when we were talking about it, I'm like, I haven't actually mapped this out, but it almost seems like there might be a chiastic structure there. And I don't know, it's just one of those things that's kind of interesting just to see how he puts things in opposition to really. Do you think there's an overt thing against commercialism in here, or is that just what comes in as far as, you know, the value of like enjoying the moment and being content?
I think there's some to do, almost in the sense like in the sense of value in a small town, right? So I don't think, well, okay, this is not in the right timeline. But you wouldn't see a McDonald's set up here, right? Like there wouldn't be, or a Walmart, you know. So there, I mean, I don't know that it's overtly, you know, much a commentary on commercialism. At the same time, if there was, it would feel very out of place. So I think almost in like the atmosphere he's created, I think you're right, but I don't. I mean, but so I mean, I guess in a way there's some commentary, but it's almost by like where my mind goes, right? To feel like a Walmart would be out of place. He's saying something, but he's not really saying. He doesn't. I don't think he says anything like that anywhere, but it's the way it feels, at least to me.
The natural setting of the story for 1928, it's a gap of time where things were definitely simpler. It was post-World War I, pre-World War II, the bubblings of pre-World War II, where life was simple. There really wasn't commercialism to speak of.
That was before. When did they break the trust? When was Teddy Roosevelt? Because that's when they started. There were the robber barons, the people that like had this huge conglomeration. Had they already started to dismantle that, or?
I don't know. The crash happened in 29.
Yeah.
So 28 was still depending on where you went, it was still a very simple time. We didn't have the Dust Bowl, we didn't have the Depression, we didn't have the wars, world wars. And I think setting it in that year for that summer, really by the nature of setting it at that time, eliminated clutter. It was a summer, he was done with school, and we got to remember, and all of us remember back to getting new shoes for summer, new sneakers, picking berries, simple things that I still go back to even today and get a lot of enjoyment of getting new shoes and going out and picking strawberries. I think there's something so relatable about the little vignettes that he wrote about that they're almost timeless. Even though it happened so long ago, we still love those little sweet moments of relationship with people in town, across the street, down the block, and the little things that we do that are markers in our summer.
So I just looked it up. The Sherman Antitrust Act was 1890, so this had already happened, but this is right before the crash. So I would say, there's a lot of people that were playing the stock market to try to get rich. I think that might have been some of Bradbury's commentary on that. I mean, obviously, that was what was coming. But anyway, the next thing that we're gonna talk about, and again, there's a lot of characters in this, and we just picked a few to talk about because we literally spent, I can't remember how many weeks we spent. Was it 8 or 9 weeks talking about this? So anyway, it's something you kind of want to go through slow and really talk about. But there's a section. This is called "The Woman Who Was Never Young," and this is on. Her name is Helen Bentley, and I'm going to read a second. Let me get to this a little bit. Okay, I'm going to read the intro to this. So she's there talking with some kids, and let me put this down here. And this is Mrs. Bentley speaking. "I don't feel any different now than I was your age," said the old lady. "Our age? Yes, once I was a pretty little girl, just like you, Jane, and you, Alice." They did not speak. "What's the matter?" "Nothing." Jane got up. "Oh, you don't have to go so soon, I hope. You haven't finished eating. Is something the matter?" "My mother said it isn't nice to fib," said Jane. "Of course it isn't. It's very bad," agreed Mrs. Bentley, "and not to listen to fibs. Who was fibbing to you, June?" Or I guess it's Jane. Jane looked at her, then glanced nervously away. "You were." "I?" Mrs. Bentley laughed and put her withered claw to her small bosom. "About what?" "About your age, about being a little girl." Mrs. Bentley stiffened. "But I was many years ago, a little girl just like you." "Come on, Alice, Tom. Just a moment," said Mrs. Bentley. "Don't you believe me?" "I don't know," said Jane. "No." So these 3 kids are convinced that this lady who was 72 was never young. And it was a really it's really interesting because she shows them pictures, they don't believe her because no one was there there's no one that knew her when she was young. They refused to believe that she was ever young. Annie and Zach, do you want to weigh in on this whole section?
Sure, Andy, take this one first since I did the last one.
Well, he truly captures the thought process of children. I really appreciate he can bounce between every age and nail it. And he really, really touched on this about how children have no concept of age. You're either old or you're young. And old people never had a young time. And children will never get old. They're so right in the moment of living that they can't fathom it being any different. And I remember when I was a teacher, one of their fun games was always the first graders is to try to guess how old I was. And I would get stuff like, she's so old. She's 30. I bet you're 30. Yes, I am. Thank you very much for that. So I would start to laugh, but on the other hand, one of their favorite things to do was the whole. I could have a rockin' loud class, and as soon as I would say, "Back when I was little, like you guys, you know what happened?" Dead silence. And I'd have them in the palm of my hand because they wanted to hear stories. Because they, first of all, couldn't conceive of the fact that I was ever anything other than what I am now, which is kind of what these kids are doing to this poor Helen, is they can't even imagine that she was a little girl. And he really captured how children think about age when they look at you.
I think you hit so many important things there. And one part that stands out to me is she finds a picture, right, of when she's a little girl. And they say, well, we don't have to believe you. And she's like, but this proves it. And their gut reaction is, you borrowed it, right? That's not really you. You borrowed that picture. And so I think, to your point, right, about children, you're always an old lady or always a young lady. There's no different. You're not any corrupt. Nobody's going to change. And so I think to me, this whole book, right, is a chronicle of a summer. And it seems endless. And this chapter, section, chapter, whatever we call them, it stands out to me just because, I remember when I was a kid, right, it would stand out and be, oh wow, it's going to be the best summer ever. And then summer's over and you're like, man, I have to go back to school. But at the beginning, it feels like summer will last forever. So I really, I don't know. I think that's why this section stands out so much to me. Just because, and if another section that we're going to talk about, the children believe all the stories. But in this case, they are so, it's just inconceivable to them. So yeah, anyway, that's why I personally really like this section.
So this is one of those, it's kind of like this chapter that you have to kind of read a couple of times. But when I was reading it the last time, the thing that stood out to me was that these were Tom's friends who was younger. He was 10. And Douglas has just come into this awareness of, he's alive. He's understanding this, that, there's a difference between now and another time. He's beginning to understand that things change. People will go away. And these children haven't done that yet. The other thing was that Mrs. Bentley has really, she's really attached to things, and she puts her identity and kind of who she is. She's holding on to all these, these knickknacks and things. And her husband had passed away. This is one of the things that he said. He says, "Be what you are, bury what you are not," he had said. "Ticket stubs are trickery. Saving things is a magic trick with mirrors." And so it wasn't until she had been holding on to all of this, and she seems so ancient and so old because she's holding on to the past. And then in this encounter with the kids who don't believe her, and it really upsets her because it's like they're undermining her identity because they're not accepting this grounded identity in these things that are in the past. And there's this other parallel with Helen Loomis, who is someone who, same first name, and I think there's kind of a significance there, but she is seen as almost as timeless. Like, she has a friendship with someone who sees her as she was when she was, 18 or something? And
Yeah.
she's still seen as that. Even though, did they say how old Helen Loomis was? Or...
I don't remember.
80s is ringing a bell with me.
Okay, yeah, she was very, very old. Like she was, but she was seen as young. And so she wasn't holding on to things, she was holding on to these experiences, but she wasn't just holding on to them, she was letting this other person enter it with her.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. That whole section about Mrs. Bradley it's like I don't know if we should say what happens at the end of that little section, because it's kind of one of those things you kind of have to read through, but yeah.
Yeah, I think another intriguing part too is Mrs. Bentley's reaction, right? Because she kind of surrenders to the children, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of gets because that's the other, shall we say, reaction, right? So I mean, we don't want to maybe live in the past or idolize the past necessarily. At the same time, I mean, it's I don't know if you all felt the same way. I felt it was sad when she was finally okay, fine, I was always an old lady. I don't know. I thought it was kind of sad, and I mean, the kids didn't know any better. I'm not blaming the kids. I'm just saying it's too bad that she kind of felt that way at the end. She wasn't. I don't know. There's a lot of those moments in this book where it's highs and lows the whole time, right? You're oh, that was so sad. But anyway, that was one that hit me.
Yeah, Annie, did you have any other thoughts about Mrs. Bradley?
Well, when you compare the two Helens, Mrs. Bradley, you're right, she puts her identity in her things. And I think we see a lot of that even in society today. We put our identity in what we have, and we carry it around, and it's a burden. It's extra stuff, it's clutter in our lives. And the other Helen, all of it's here in lived experiences that is so much more real than clinging to a ticket stub. The ticket stub is the gateway to that memory, and the other Helen has all the memories in her head, and she can just go there. She doesn't need the tangible evidence that she has it. It's all in her. It's in her soul. It's in her heart. And I think that is really important to see the difference between the two, because one is trapped with stuff and the other one is freed by this transcendent beauty that she lives through all of the revisiting of all of the trips that she took in the times that she was with her friends and these beautiful things that she saw. And I think that's a very huge perspective for us to consider looking at life.
Yeah, and that is, well, you're looking at I guess maybe we should talk a little bit about what the whole theme, title of the book is about, Dandelion Wine. I guess we didn't talk about that, but anyway, it's I didn't know this until I read the book, but you can make wine using dandelions. And so the Grandpa Spalding would bottle, which I don't understand how this is possible. How would you be able to make a bottle of dandelion wine every single day? But that's what it is. He makes a bottle of dandelion wine every single day of the summer. And, you know, it's like they're bottling up these memories to be, you know, remembered on another day. And there's a section where he wants, somebody comes in that's helping him, and they want to put in this, was it artificial turf? It wasn't artificial turf, but it's grass that you didn't have to mow, wouldn't get any weeds. And he's like, no, you know, I don't want that. He goes, because then he wouldn't have, you know, any of the dandelions, that whole experience that has been a part of his summer for who knows how many years would be gone. So I think, like with Mrs. Bradley, she was very, you know, it's very solitary in her memory of things, right? It's like things that she's holding on to. And even like with the dandelion wine, it's something that you kind of go in when you drink it, it's, you're remembering, but then it's gone. It's not this clinging to, it's like appreciating and savoring what was there, but it's not this hoarding, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a marker. It's a marker of the days, just like when Douglas keeps the diary, the day-by-day diary, and he writes down the important things.
Mm-hmm.
The Dandelion Wine is a record of the important days, day by day by day. He has a bottle of it. And I think it's also rather symbolic that Dandelion Wine is Dandelion Wine and not a grape wine or an apple wine, cherry, peach, or any other flavor. It's something so basic and something that we just walk past.
Mm-hmm.
Do we look down at dandelions? No, they're just a weed. Grapes we notice because a grapevine is beautiful. Other fruit trees we go out and take advantage of. But a dandelion is a pretty humble, basic thing. And I think if he would have chosen anything else to make the wine, it wouldn't have been as significant.
Mm-hmm.
He's using something that is a basic part. Do you remember taking the dandelions and putting them under your chin when you were little, see if you liked butter? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And if you had yellow under your chin, oh, you like butter. I don't know why that was such a revolutionary thought, but we would put the dandelions under our chin. That was a rite of summer, just like probably making a bottle of dandelion wine. So I really appreciate the significance of what he chose to make that wine out of.
And the one thing that I wanted to read was there's another quote. Now this is a Douglas's great grandmother, and this is at the end of her life. This is towards the end of the book, and she's calling all of her family in to have a conversation with them, and Douglas is upset about this. But this is a contrast between, I think, her. This is one of those parallels between Mrs. Bentley and great grandma. But let's see, let me add this here. Okay. And Douglas, for shame, you cut your fingernails, don't you? Yes'm. And you don't yell when your body makes itself over every 7 years or so. Dead cells and new added to your fingers and your heart. You don't mind that, do you? No, ma'am. Well, consider then, boy, any man saves fingernail clippings is a fool. You ever see a snake bother to keep his peeled skin? That's about all you got here. Today in this bed is fingernails and snake skin. One good breath would send me up in flakes. Important thing is not me that's lying here, but in the downstairs cooking supper, or out in the garage under the car, or in the library reading, all the new parts, they count. I'm not really dying today. No person ever died that had a family. I'll be around a long time. 1,000 years from now, a whole township of my offspring will be biting sour apples in the gumwood shade. That's my answer to anyone asks big questions. And I think that's like just kind of showing, like when you look at Mrs. Bentley and Grandma's, this is like completely different. So Mrs. Bentley is like focusing on things, and Grandma's like, you know what? You live in the moment. You accept the new things that are there. And it's family and relationships that are important.
And I agree with that. And I'm just going to give a shout out to our fellow book club member Sean White and his love of G.H. Chesterton. Because that's what this is all about. It's like the ordinary, right? And that was what Chesterton was all about. It was all about the ordinary, all about, just enjoying kind of, I don't want to say the simplicity, but, yeah, I mean, the ordinary is the best way to put it. Just, like you said, Andy, with Dandelions, it's so critical to the story that this small town is not fancy, it's not rich, it's not anything. It's just plain, and that's perfectly okay.
Yeah. Well, let's go to, now there's actually 3 machines mentioned in the book, and we're going to talk about 2 of them. One is a happy machine, the other is the green machine, and the third one is time machine. And this is Colonel Freely, and the boys go to him and they see him as sort of a time machine because he tells them, the stories of his life. And what do you guys think it was about the way he told the stories that let them enter in and experience it?
I think it was important that he told the stories as if he was there. When he's talking about the buffalo, when he's talking about the war, he wasn't looking at the boys and saying, there was this time when I did this. He goes back. He stares off and goes back, almost like there's silent movies. Well, he was the movie that had no pictures, but it was the audible stuff. So he would pull them in. It was almost like he was taking the boys on a movie adventure about riding horses and buffalo and smoke and all of the gritty bits of each story that were so important to make it really real. And I think that the fact that he's sharing these stories anyhow is really important, because we humans, we are made of stories. Our past is full of stories that we share. And that he would share all of this history. And I love how they regarded him as a time machine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, what they had the happiness machine, which you could go anywhere in this happiness machine, technically. But he was the time machine. And his experiences that he would take you on were so much more real, I think, than watching a picture. I think to hear the story, to live the story vicariously through his memory was really important. And I think it made it that much more real to the boys.
I love how you say that, because Annie, you were talking earlier about your first grade class or your young class, and when you would say, yeah, back in my day, this, and they eat that up, right? They love that. And so I think it's very much, I don't know, it's amazing to see how they respond to a well-told story, It's not so much a boring story or anything like that, but, and that may be the difference between him and Helen, to be honest. I don't know, that may be the difference, but it's a thought.
Yeah.
And Zach, this was one that that you wanted to highlight, and this is another kind of parallel, because a little bit later, he's there talking to the boys, and a little bit later, I don't know, should we say this? What, cause it kind of it's important to his story, but I don't know if this is, you think this is a spoiler about the second part of his,
I don't want to be a buzz killer.
Okay.
I want everyone to read this book.
Okay, well, anyway, it's really interesting when, we're not going to tell you what happens, but Colonel Freely kind of gets cut off from his connection to his memories and his experiencing them. And so, that's kind of an interesting. Zach will be back in a second. It's kind of an interesting contrast, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think?
Yeah, he gets cut off from his memories, and that's frustrating. I know also with older people, that connection is so important. A consistent connection is like a conduit for memory. I know when I talk to my own dad, I can get him rolling on a story if I feed into it a little bit and I take him back to that time. He'll jump in and run with it. But just to come up with it cold is very difficult. So I can start him off with a couple of sentences. Remember when, or I remember how something tasted. Do you remember how that tasted? Or do you remember how that smelled? Or what it felt like to walk on that grass? And then they run with it. But yeah, it's important. I think it's important to remember that when we talk to people. Remember that they have connections to the past and try to join them on that conduit to keep the story going.
Yeah, and that was kind of the way it was with Colonel Freely and the boys. Like, he would just kind of be sitting there and they would like give him a word and he would go, oh yeah, and then go in on the story. That's exactly the way it was for them.
Yep, you just coax it out.
Yeah. Zach, do you want to talk more about why this is one of your favorite parts in the book?
Sure. I mean, so one thing that, we've hit on the entire time, right, is this, like, appreciation for the past, this reverence for the past. And so that's one thing that certainly stands out for me. Another thing about the Colonel is, he's really, he's not completely there all the time, right? He seems to have the head in and head out, like you were talking about. That one word sets him off. And I love seeing that because so many people would just write him off as, like, he's a crazy old man. Yeah, he's not. And yet, look at all that he can do and look at how he can captivate these boys. And I love that because, I don't know. I feel like, well, that's some cultural, commentary, I suppose, and probably even more so true now than it was in Bradbury's day, that we forget our elders, right? And we don't always appreciate them. So I think that's why I love it, that even this guy who doesn't seem like maybe he has a ton to offer, actually offers a lot. And then you contrast that with the last story about Helen Bentley, and it's remarkable, right? How, like, his stories grab the kids, hers are, like, denied by the kids. But what's the difference? It's bringing them to life, and it's not, because she's arguably more with it than he is, right? She's arguably more in better health, right, than he is. And yet, who captivates the kids? The one who, like, tells the story. So I don't know. That's why I love it.
Yeah, I think the whole book reminds me of, and I should have gotten the quote out, C.S. Lewis is about contemplation versus enjoyment. And so Helen Bentley was all about, she's like going in, fixating on a certain thing, and she doesn't ever really have a satisfaction, and she's never enjoying it. And the other Helen is more going in and entering into the experience, and that's really what you see throughout the book. The people who have that true contentment are the people that are just, enjoying the experience. And we didn't pick this one out to talk about tonight, but there's another part of the book where there's they're talking about grandma's cooking, and everybody just loves it, and they, it's just amazing. And she's like half blind, and her kitchen is an entire mess, and she just throws things together, and everything is good, and it's not only good, but it just makes people happy. And the aunt comes, and she has to dissect it. she has to like break it down and basically make it mechanized, and that's a whole other part of the story, but it's just it's something you got to read. But we try to, I guess it's the mechanizing things, right? Things that aren't meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think it's a contrast between reason and imagination. There's always a balance, but the aunt who comes in and wants to improve Grandma's kitchen, the whole time I was reading that chapter, I'm screaming at the pages going, no, don't do this. Leave Grandma alone. And it was the little tiny details, like they never talk exactly about what they're eating. It's just good. And it brings them joy. And it brings conversation. And they're sitting around a table, all the boarders and the family, and they're having this wonderful relationship time, and they're laughing. And then logic and reason step in, and I'm going to fix this, and we're going to be efficient, and we're going to make this make sense, and we're going to slap labels on everything, and it's going to be so much better. Is it really? There's got to be a balance. It's just like the machine. The happiness machine, well, I can take a plane, which is a machine, and it'll take me to Paris, so I can use a machine to maybe make a path to get to what I can experience some happiness with. But the actual thing is not going to bring me any happiness. The actual logic and reason of going through my entire kitchen and labeling everything, that's not going to make people happy who I'm cooking for. Is it really going to even improve my situation and how I serve others, how I help others, how I minister to others?
Yeah. So one of the other people in the book club, Demita, who couldn't be here tonight, she made an observation that there's a lot of windows in the book that seem to have significance. And, windows are about like seeing through and having a perspective. And I think she's right. I think it is about the importance of perspective, being able to... even there's this whole, what would you call the thing about the lonely one? How would you describe that? The horror part of the book? There's so much in this book, it's hard to even, give a synopsis, because there's all these little pieces that go in it. But there's kind of this whole, how would you describe it?
And the dark ravine.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
If there's a villain in the book, it's the lonely one, but because everything we've talked about, it's been thoughtful, right? But it's not overly dark.
No.
But then you have, you're right, the ravine, and you have the lonely one. You have these two, dark shadows that just kind of show up every now and then. They're not major players, right? Well, but they are. It's weird. They're, in the background all the time. But ordinary life still goes on pretty happily most of the time. It's weird.
Yeah. And the whole, what was the girl's name? Is it Lavinia? Is that what's her name?
Lavinia, right?
Yeah, Lavinia. She had this one perspective about the threat, and then when she was in it herself, it kind of changed. Actually, I like that. I like that whole part of the book, especially the end. It's my favorite. But you have to read it. We're not going to tell you what happened.
No spoilers.
It's actually worth reading the book just to get to that part.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we are almost at an hour here, and this is just a few of our thoughts about Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury, and we hope that after you watch this that you want to read it too. And so if you do, be sure to come back and make a comment and let us know what you think about the book, because I'll tell you, the weirdest thing for me, in the first meeting, the only thing I could talk about is I can't even believe this is the same author as Fahrenheit 451, because it just seems so, it is, right? Because I haven't read Fahrenheit, that book, in a long time, but it's a totally different, feels like a different person almost, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the person who picked the book, he actually reads this every summer, and so this is his favorite book. So Anyway, the other thing that kind of surprised me is I can't believe they haven't made a movie about this.
Oh, it would make a great movie, especially with The Lonely One in the Ravine and the arcade.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing in the box in the arcade.
Yeah.
There's so many ways this would be a blockbuster. It really would, and we need to start sending letters out, requesting.
Well, and even the opening and closing. So I don't. This isn't too much of a spoiler, but the book opens with Douglas. It's Douglas, right? It's not Tom. It's Douglas waking up to town, and then and it's just so beautiful at the beginning. It's him like waking everybody up, and I love that. That scene. You see the lights come on, and it's almost like he's almost like a wizard, like calling them out and light this up, light that up. It's gorgeous, and I mean I just love that would be a beautiful opening scene to a movie. So yeah, filmmakers out there hopefully are listening to us.
Yeah, I hope so. It's almost like it's almost poetic. The entire book is it's so beautiful, and the way he ties words together. It has a rhythm to it.
Yeah, that's the only pitfall about making this is that the writing is so beautiful that it would be really hard to. I mean, that's why it's so vivid, because the writing is just incredible.
It's true,
and that wouldn't necessarily. I don't know that would necessarily come through in a movie. It would have to be somebody that really could. I mean, they'd have to have the right vision and the right perspective to really kind of give the same sort of feel to it, I think, because I think that would be hard. I did read somewhere that they had there was a musical once that was unrecorded. There's a song out there, but I am really surprised that this hasn't become more, hasn't been put to other mediums other than the book.
Yeah.
But
and it seems to be kind of a cult classic, because I'd never heard of it
either.
And when I saw this goofy cover, I thought, what on earth are we reading for book club this month? And I thought, oh man, but if Sean's read it this many times, it's got to be good. And I was captivated from page one. I couldn't put it down. And it was such a delightful surprise. I hit every emotion in it. I got a little choked up, especially with the Colonel. It hit every emotion. It pulled in so many memories of past summers, and it is really a great summer read. It had me going back to getting PF flyers, my set of PF flyers, and then you would run down the sidewalk, stub your toe, fall on your face, and you'd get that first scuff on your brand new white sneakers. It was devastating. Or getting your first skin knee of the summer, or helping your grandpa pick blackberries. All of those memories came back, and it was so nice to be able to do that, just rest in memories, a smattering of memories of sweet things that had happened here and there. I really appreciate him taking us back to that.
Yeah. The other thing too, that just as didn't he say he wrote something like that every single day?
Yeah.
That was like
exercise he would do. He would just sit down and start to write.
That was I was like, holy crap, oh my goodness. Okay, obviously I do not work on my writing enough, but
I know. I feel like, wow, I call myself a writer. I don't sit down and write a chapter of a book every day.
Well, this wasn't, I don't even think it was a chapter. He was just writing a scene, and he's, yeah, and so he would, I think that is a lesson to be learned, like for anybody that wants to write and write well, is that it doesn't just happen. You have to practice.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah. Which is not easy. It's hard. So, but he had a lot of discipline in his writing.
Yeah.
But anyway, any other final thoughts, you guys, before we call it a night?
I just recommend reading it. Just stop reading everything else that's heavy in your life and pick this up, and it will carry you away. It really, really will. This is in the top 10 of the books that I've read. And I'm so glad we did. I never would have pulled it off the shelf, and now it's sitting on my desk constantly. And sometimes I'll just pick it up and I'll just read, because the chapters are really short. But it's almost like I'm going back in my memories, and I'll pick up, just read a chapter to refresh my mind of that moment, the kernel or the wine or the fake grass that they try to talk him into getting. Or, So
yeah. So how about you, Zach?
Oh, absolutely recommended. I love this book, and it's so much more fun to read with other people, you know? Like, reading it with you always, because it's fun to talk about, and they're fun stories, and we all had to reminisce, and so that I appreciated that personally.
Yeah, it was. Those were really fun book club discussions talking about this book. But anyway, okay, well, thanks for joining us. And if you haven't already, wherever you're watching this from, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and share it with somebody. And if you haven't already read this, then grab a couple people and be sure to read it. And it will be a fun experience. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.